We have only seen the real Beyond Netero once in the entirety of Hunter x Hunter, during chapter 340. Hello and welcome back to Suckwar Central! My name is CJ, and today I want to talk about how despite all the page time he's been getting recently, we actually know very little about who Beyond Netero is, what he wants in its totality, and what he truly believes. For everything you think you know about this man, it's a coin toss between whether it's true or it's just what he wants you to think at this particular moment. See, Beyond's authentic self is hidden under two elaborate, carefully curated personas, and when we see him in the manga, he's almost always wearing one of these two masks. In order to get a glimpse behind the curtain, we're going to have to talk about the very real people who inspired this fictional character. So join me as we dive into what we do and don't actually know about this enigmatic would-be pioneer, kingmaker, power broker, and strange little smelly murder hobo. For starters, let's explore these personas, as I call them. The first and foremost is the public, righteous pioneer persona, a believer in equality, justice, and improving the human race through exploration of the Dark Continent. This is, of course, the persona that he adopts during his public speech to the world, raising support for his expedition to the Dark Continent. However, I think it's also the persona that moves like suing the Kakin Empire over human rights abuses serves, and it's probably the persona that recruited Bill to his expedition team. Now, let's think of Beyond's whole operation as assembling a chessboard for a second. The righteous pioneer is, for lack of a better turn of phrase, the image that Beyond adopts in order to recruit pawns. He uses it to bolster his forces with people who will more or less be cogs in his machine that have smaller overall roles to play, and whom he doesn't expect to come face to face with the minutiae of his sinister operations. This includes support personnel, colonists, and cannon fodder, who just need to be attracted by Beyond's vision and won't ever realize he's anything but a super morally upstanding guy until it's too late. Of course, it's inevitable that as people get closer to him and become more familiar with the man, they will discover that Beyond is not such an unabashed paragon of virtue as he seems. This is where the second persona comes in, the morally gray hero. And the thing about this one is that its characteristics vary by who he's talking to. It's not so much a consistent story he tells people as a mask he tailors to be appropriate to whichever situation he needs to don it for. It's something he usually employs when people start to uncover his shadier sides, as a way to say, yes, I did all this and I would do it again, because what I'm doing is right and necessary, and if it's not, well, at least it benefits you, so piss off. As the morally gray hero, Beyond frames himself as a fundamentally good person, but who employs shady and underhanded tactics in order to achieve his goals. A key part of it is that he frames these goals as either noble or of interest to the people he's talking to. If he admits that he's self-interested, he makes sure to explain how his self-interest will benefit whoever he's talking to. This is the persona Beyond uses when he turns himself into the Zodiacs, and when he speaks to Furikov on the phone in chapter 415. For example, when he speaks to the Zodiacs, he tries to overwhelm and manipulate them with his charisma and directness, portraying himself as a disruptive truth-teller amidst a sea of lies. Of course I'm breaking the rules, he seems to say in his spiel to Cheadle, because the so-called rules you follow are a web of lies and deceptions and political bullshit trying to hold us all back. He speaks to the highest level officials in the Hunter Association, the most individualistic and selfish organization on the planet, and more or less says, "You're too good to be shackled by the rules. I want you all to accompany me to the Dark Continent because I respect you." And it's subtle, he doesn't lay it on too thick or flatter the Zodiacs, which would make it too obvious, but the way he speaks to them directly and seemingly in an honest manner implies that he respects them and wants them on his team. And for people who are primarily out for themselves, who seek challenges and embody the classic spirit of what it means to be a hunter, Beyond's appeal has been very carefully crafted to win them over. And it actually works on Gita pretty much immediately, not to mention Kanzai, who was hooked in from the start by Beyond's entire premise. Meanwhile, with Furikov, he takes a very different approach of trying to tell the guy what he wants to hear. He goes, "Yeah, I'm cursing you. Yeah, I'm a messed up dude using my children as sacrificial curse bombs, you caught me. But since it's a charm for Kakin's prosperity, and all for Prince Benjamin's benefit, you shouldn't care. Plus, you've already signed up to die and pass on your ability to Benjamin, so it's a win-win, right? It's basically the same thing." Oh, look at me, I'm so morally gray, the ends justify the means, congratulations, you uncovered my flaws, which are that I hate my kids and use them for shady net curses, but absolutely nothing else. And also, have I ever told you how awesome it is that you aren't in the Nasubi files? I really respect you for that. And he goes on to say that he needs to shut up now or he'll be talking forever, which implies some of the things he just said were slip-ups caused by him being overly talkative and enthusiastic, as opposed to, carefully crafted manipulations designed to elicit specific feelings. The point is, both of these characters he played were tailored to the specific situation he created them for. They were designed for people who would be on their guard around him, and were already expecting to find skeletons in his closet. By appearing to wear his heart on his sleeve and being direct about what he wants, cutting through the bullshit, Beyond gets people to see him like they saw his father, an overconfident jackass who believes in his desires above all else, and so has no real need to hide his intentions. Like, why would he lie? He doesn't need to lie, that's not his style. This makes people less likely to think there are any schemes of his left to uncover. By admitting to something bad that's actually secretly kind of good for whoever he's talking to, Beyond gets people to avoid digging for something worse. For lack of a better way to put it, Beyond just doesn't look and act the way people think a liar does. He looks like a murder hobo and acts like a murder hobo, and is the son of a famous murder hobo, so people tend to just buy it. It's like the opposite of pretty privilege. The only time we see him acting like the evil zealot he actually is when he's discussing his plan with his expedition team. And truly, this man is enough of an enigma that I still don't feel confident saying this isn't yet another act, put on to win over people who can forgive any moral transgressions he might make, and who are more than willing to crush anyone who stands in their way. And yeah, to address the question posed by the title of this video, I don't think we can conclusively answer it yet. But I think we have enough evidence to at least try, and a few avenues to discuss what kind of person Beyond Netero really is at heart. The first thing I want to say is that I think Bill's characterization of Beyond as a man-child who loves to play mind games and expose his own plans actually gives us some decent clues about him. Yes, there is of course the possibility that Bill fell for Beyond's persona too, but in this case I don't quite think so. I say this because Beyond's playful love of mind games that Bill describes is the one thing that seems fairly consistent across all his appearances. Whether he's making a propagandistic speech to the masses, having a heated exchange with Furikov, or hyping up his expedition team, Beyond is always welcoming of, and in fact, aggressively embraces challenges to his plans, promising to crush them. It's clear that conflict, strategy, and mind games are what he enjoys, in the same way his father lived for martial combat. Beyond seeks to explore the unknown without any limits, and be the first person from Lake Mobius to have all sorts of incredible experiences, sure, but there's more to it than that. Think about the challenges that await on the Dark Continent. Rather than powerful opponents that appealed to Isaac, the Dark Continent contains deadly logic puzzles like challenges that seem a lot more up Beyond's alley. And that's just in regards to the continent itself. I still think there's even more to it. Honestly, I think Beyond is a bit more egotistical and self-centered than his father. People think he's just excited to go play in the new world, but I think Beyond wants to make a name for himself. He's so concerned with firsts, and specifically using the phrases "leaving my mark on virgin territory" and "acquire things nobody has touched" implies that he cares about the impact of his actions. This suggests to me that it is entirely possible Beyond has the world's worst case of daddy issues. I mean, think about how his father locked down travel to the Dark Continent, and Beyond became obsessed with it. He doesn't just want to do something his father never has done. He wants to succeed at something his father never could do. Obviously, this isn't his entire reason for exploring the Dark Continent, but it's almost certainly one of his motivators. I mean, you have to wonder why he's done things the way he has. Surely if just exploring the Dark Continent was all he was after, he could just take another unauthorized voyage there with a team of relevant experts who he could recruit with money or any other way, since we know just how persuasive he can be. But no, he wanted this to be big. He's dragged the whole world into his quest, orchestrated a dastardly plan to take control of the Succession War, and burrowed to the very heart of Kakin because exploring the Dark Continent isn't enough for him. Beyond doesn't just want to explore the new world, he wants to be the man who explored the new world. He's clearly determined to make it into the history books with this one. It's like he was born to be famous. Now you could argue that he's only orchestrated this to obtain cannon fodder to throw at the Dark Continent, and fair enough. Only not that fair, because if that's all he wanted, Well, Periston is in control of 5,000 Chimera ants. He could just use those or a bunch of carnival orphans or whatever. He's got Nanan money, there are a million easier ways to do this. But I think the Isaac Netero thing, his temperamental and undignified behavior in his debut chapter, the fact that he waited until his father was dead to take on the Dark Continent, and Bill's description of him as a man-child, all point to this guy honestly being just a little bit pathetic. And I think this will become even more clear when we get into the real-life people that Beyond Netero is based on. For starters, we have the Chinese general Guan Yu, who Beyond looks similar to when he's in his more regal and dignified get-ups. Guan Yu is a Chinese deity of military heroism, referred to by one emperor as Holy Emperor Guan, the great god who subdues the demons in the three worlds and whose awe spreads far and moves heaven. Goes hard, right? He's said to be a bodhisattva, renowned for his courage, honor, loyalty, and heroism, having fought to the death for the sake of his master in life before transcending to become a powerful spirit. Similar to Guan Yin, the deity with which Isaac Netero is associated, Beyond is a warped and twisted version of a religious figure, or is he? See, the real-life Guan Yu was a military general serving under the famous warlord Liu Bei, and he wasn't some enlightened saint. He fled his hometown as a young man after killing a so-called bully, before signing up with the local warlord to put down a rebellion on his lands. A rebellion that started, mind you, because the emperor was horribly corrupt, and a highly saturated job market drove down the value of labor and made desperate people vulnerable to exploitation. Damn, I guess things never really change, huh? And yeah, he was a successful general for Liu Bei until his luck ran out and he got executed because the 3rd century was a crazy time for China. It was only after his death that he was lionized and made into essentially a folk hero and paragon of virtue and myth through centuries of storytelling that really exaggerated his morality and accomplishments. I can already see a few similarities with Beyond. Beyond has spent decades preparing to make himself known to the world and carefully prepared a public persona that has people worshipping him as a hero and prepared to follow him into whatever dreadful execution awaits in the new world. He's been heavily lionized for sure, such that the only parts of his mythos that resemble the truth are so thoroughly divorced from reality that they may as well be about a different person altogether. However, there is in fact a person who I think Beyond is a lot more similar to. While in his public appearances, he looks a lot more like Guan Yu, it's when he's imprisoned and stripped of his belongings and decorum that we can see his resemblance to a man called Shoko Asahara. Oh boy, let me tell you some shit about Mr. Shoko Asahara. On April 3rd, 1995, journalist James Welsh wrote about the man. A look at his life reveals a rather pathetic figure at war with the world because he could not find an easy place in it. Shoko Asahara was many things: a cult leader, a terrorist, a swindler, a nihilistic maniac, a con man, a genius, and a master manipulator. I believe that, if his public persona was modeled after Guan Yu, Beyond's private persona and even his real self are closer to Asahara. Asahara chased power from his youth, setting up an extortion racket at his school at the age of 6 and declaring his intent to be Prime Minister of Japan, but failing to even be class president because his peers were terrified of him. And this guy, man, he is one of the scariest people to have ever lived. He essentially went on several trips to religious sites around the world and madly devoted himself to studying various religions, most likely to determine what made them successful and popular. I say this because he subsequently started a cult, and it was a decently successful cult, but what distinguished it was its intense brutality, aggressiveness, and ambition. Asahara's cult targeted people left feeling lost and cynical by the materialist consumerism of the 80s, and he favored recruiting educated middle-class people to his inner circle who had graduated from Japan's elite universities, along with members of the military, bureaucrats, and the Tokyo police, prompting his cult to be nicknamed the Cult of the Elite. The cult, which was actually called Om Shinrikyo at the time, was starting to make moves, attempting to get its members elected into positions of power in Japan and spreading its influence across the world. It's really fascinating stuff, and I'll include links to the sources I consulted while researching this video in case anybody wants to read more. Anyway, the Om Shinrikyo organization also exerted intense pressure on its critics through negotiations, threats, and coercion carried out behind closed doors, and even had people killed. Its leader was described as a man incredibly skilled at manipulation, but also a bit of a man-child whose plans were influenced by his immature nature and interests. Does all that sound a little familiar? Asahara was also obsessed with the end of the world and achieving it through poison gas attacks, and right now it seems like the first queen Unma acted on Beyond's behalf to coerce Furikov into conducting a poison gas attack that has caused all hell to break loose aboard the Black Whale. And mind you, on some occasions, Asahara reportedly got his subordinates to kill people by saying they'd be the ones killed if they refused to comply. Meanwhile, while Asahara's cult are most famous for unleashing poison gas in the Tokyo subway as part of an attempted mass killing, the man also had his inner circle use poisonous gases and manufactured them with his cult to carry out assassinations against people he wanted gone for one reason or another. Of course, the majority of his followers weren't on board with all this and didn't know most of it was him. After realizing what he'd done, many of his cult members later turned against him. So yeah, there are a lot of parallels between Shoko Asahara and Beyond Netero, and I think between all that and just looking at the two side by side, it's pretty unambiguously clear that Beyond Netero is modeled after Shoko Asahara in looks, design, personality, everything. However, I think the nature of his cult also has a few things to tell us about the Hunter x Hunter character it inspired. Aum Shinrikyo, the cult of Shoko Asahara, was a bizarre mix of Buddhism, Taoism, Hinduism, Christianity, and Shoko Asahara's love in anime and manga that taught that he was basically Jesus, the Buddha, and Kalki all rolled into one. But whether Asahara was a genuinely delusional man who actually believed this or just a cynical nihilist maniac using religion to assemble followers for his misanthropic machinations remains hotly contested to this day. Since he was executed without even having a psych evaluation done, because the government was afraid he'd be declared insane and avoid execution, I suppose we'll never know. But the whole man's life story bears some resemblance to Beyond, a man towing the line between saint and swindler. Even amongst the readers of Hunter x Hunter, I see people talk about Beyond like he's some sort of evil yet enlightened figure, who has cast off the pedestrian chains of morality and materialism in order to pursue the higher world that awaits in the great unknown. But the resemblance between him and Shoko Asahara conjures to mind a deceiver and a madman who is anything but a bodhisattva, really. Ultimately, though, I think the truth is somewhere in between, because I feel that, as much as Beyond might actually be driven by his complicated feelings toward his father and some nagging egotistical desire to make his way into the history books, I do think that his wonder and awe toward the great unknown that is the Dark Continent is genuine. This clue is something I've gotten from what happened to the Aum Shinrikyo cult after Asahara was arrested. You see, it's split into two organizations. The first is called Hikari no wa, an organization created by the Aum Shinrikyo members who condemned Asahara and wanted to create an organization that brought the same spiritual fulfillment as Aum Shinrikyo, without any of the insane end-of-the-world stuff or, crimes. Hikari no wa is also devoted to helping people of all religions think critically about the place religion has in their lives and doesn't seek to convert people, teaching that all religions are created equal. However, the original group, at least the ones that weren't convicted of any crimes, continue to operate despite attempts to ban them because of how tightly religious freedom is written into Japan's constitution. This group, known nowadays as Aleph, was named after the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And this letter has a ton of different meanings across various languages and cultures throughout history, but the one that's really relevant to Beyond Netero is a certain short story. El Aleph, written by Jorge Luis Borges, tells the story of a point in space upon which one can stare into the limitless, infinite vastness of the universe and see, quite literally, every point in space, all at once, without any confusion and without going insane or suffering any negative drawbacks, really. Side note, Borges is one of my favorite writers, and I encourage anyone who has the time to go read his short story Pierre Menard, author of the Quijote, which I'll link in the description. Completely unrelated to Hunter x Hunter, it's just a real banger. Anyway, a major character in El Aleph is a poet who has discovered that point in his basement and becomes fixated on it, using it to write a poem that describes everything in the world. The Aleph is destroyed before he can finish the poem, however. The protagonist of the story sees the Aleph, but because he doesn't like that poet, pretends to not be impressed, and reasons that it was probably a false Aleph, and the real thing would certainly be much more impressive. Now, this story means a lot of things to a lot of people, but to me, this story is about the vast unknown rendered ordinary and boring by being put into a book or the context of a prior experience. If I were to interpret this story's symbolism in the context of Hunter x Hunter, it strikes me as a young Beyond reading the book written by Don Freaks and taking his 2 trips to the Dark Continent and finding it all unsatisfying. He feels that there's so much more out there than the tiny fraction he's seen and read about. He is not content with this being the great unknown, or at least all of the great unknown he gets to experience. Now, okay, that might seem like a stretch, but you know how Togashi is with his literary and religious symbolism, and you have to remember that this all comes from the contemporary name of the group created by the man Beyond Netero is absolutely based on. And by that token, I believe we can actually use the fate of the Om Shinrikyo cult to essentially figure out what's going to happen with Beyond's group. You're going to have, in the minority, people like Bill, oblivious pawns in his scheme who, once they find out the truth of what he is, reject him and try to go against what his scheme stood for. And then you'll have the majority who, while not directly associated with Beyond's crimes, aren't swayed at all by the truth of who he is and continue to follow him in their pursuit of the great unknown Aleph that is the Dark Continent. And that is going to do it so far for my little examination of Beyond Netero's character and the real-life personages and cults that inspired him. I do hope you'll join me next time for more Hunter x Hunter yapping, and I hope you have a beyond wonderful day.